Hello friends, thank you for joining me. Today I would like to refer to an article that was published yesterday in the Jerusalem Post under the title 10 Things That You Should Know About the Settlement in Caves under the Trump Plan. Now, currently in Israel we are very concerned. On the one hand, we are very optimistic or glad that our Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government are planning to declare sovereignty in places in Judea and Samaria, but we are concerned with the obligation of our government to the deal of the century that was proposed by American President Trump, because there are a lot of very problematic details in that plan. And here in this article, Tova Lazarov of the Jerusalem Post addressed 10 things that we should know about regarding the settlement in caves. When she refers to settlement in caves, she's referring to Israeli towns in the Samaria and in Judea that under the plan, under the maps that were attached to the Trump plan for the deal of the century, many of these towns would become tiny islands within the Palestinian Authority. And that is very dangerous for these towns and very concerning. So she wrote 10 points on this issue, and I would like to review her article and share my take on some of these issues. She says that at least 15 towns, 15 communities in the geographical area would be located in the Palestinian state in the future. So she writes, fear that President Trump's peace plan endangers at least 15 West Bank settlements. Again, in my vocabulary, I don't like using the term West Bank settlements. We're referring to Jewish Israeli towns in the Samaria and in Judea. And she lists 10 things that we should know about this. Number one, she writes, these settlements likely would have been endangered in any peace plan. Well, any peace plan that we've heard of so far, based on the Oslo two-state solution, dividing the area of Judea and Samaria into and cutting off part of it to establish a Palestinian state, in many or all of the variations of these plans that we have heard about over the years, Israeli towns have been threatened to be hurt, to be removed, to be erased, the residents to be displaced, as we saw in the disengagement in 2005, when Israel removed all of the Israeli towns in Gaza and in the northern Shomron. 4 towns were removed. So again, in all of these suggestions, all of these proposals that we've heard in the variations of the two-state idea, many of these towns were under threat in any case. What is surprising for us or disappointing for us is that American President Trump, with all of his good intentions, copy-pasted these bad ideas from previous proposals. And that is very disturbing. 15 of these communities, she writes, considered isolated, which means that they're located outside of the route of the security barrier and not considered within the settlement blocks. So these are two things. One is the security barrier. During the Second Intifada, when the Palestinian terrorists were bringing suicide bombers into shopping centers and public transportation in Israel, and carrying out massive attacks, Israel established a security barrier cutting off the major Palestinian or Arab population centers in Judea and Samaria from the center of Israel. So many of the Israeli towns in the Samaria and Judea are currently geographically located west of the security barrier. So although politically they are in areas that are considered the West Bank, physically they are west of the security barrier. So Tova in her article is referring to these towns that are under threat now in the Trump proposal, that they are outside of the security barrier, which means they are deeper within the Samaria and Judea. That is true. She also refers to the settlement blocks, which is a term that has been used in the past to refer to large Israeli population centers in the Samaria and Judea. Places like cities like Male Adumim or Givat Ze'ev or Ariel and so forth. And the towns that we are referring to now are further away from these major population areas, which is also true. And then she refers to agreements that historic deals between or understandings between American President George Bush, which is history, or Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, which too is history. We're talking about here and now, and we're talking about decisions that will be made by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu in collaboration with American President Trump. She says, now, former President of the United States, Barack Obama, who was not friendly to Israel and surely not friendly to the Jewish existence in Judea and Samaria, didn't see any difference. In his opinion, there was no difference between Israeli towns that in the Samaria and Judea that were west of the separation barrier or towns that were east of the separation barrier. And that was a negative opinion of these places. So she writes that President Donald Trump, too, is not making a distinction between these areas, these towns on either side of the Green Line, which we would is more friendly to our situation today, as he sees that all of these Israeli towns are part of Israel. But again, we're referring to the 15 towns that would become isolated within the Palestinian Authority. She says currently there are about 130 recognized settlements or recognized Israeli towns in the Samaria and Judea, which is not including outposts. Outposts are smaller towns that were established during the period of these ongoing negotiations with the Palestinians starting in 1992. At least 15 of these communities pose a geographical challenge, she writes, because they're located in territory that, according to the Trump plan, is designated to be part of the Palestinian state. That is our great concern today, that we would agree to these towns being inaccessible deep within the Palestinian Authority. And of course, we do not trust the Palestinian Authority to provide any protection. On the contrary, their objective is to strangle these towns, and that, of course, would be a great danger to the future of these towns. As a result, she writes, they would be considered small Israeli islands of sovereignty in caves, encased within the future Palestinian state. They would be linked to sovereign Israel by only one road. Only one road in the best case scenario, or wouldn't be linked to Israel at all. And in order to access these towns, the residents and service providers would have to drive through the Palestinian Authority, which today is not friendly to Israelis at all. Israelis do not enter the Palestinian Authority. It's considered dangerous to Israelis. They could be attacked and would have no protection within these areas. I only touched on point number one. I'm going to briefly touch on point number two, and then maybe I'll do another session to discuss more of the points of this article. She says, number two, most of the settlements are in Samaria and the south hills of Hebron. Most of these communities that are under threat of becoming isolated are either in the Samaria, where I live, not the particular town that I live in, but 4 or 5 towns just north of where I live, Itzhar, Har Bracha, Elon Moreh, Itamar. All of these towns would be closed off and would not be accessible. As my friend and colleague Boaz Ha'etzni wrote today on a post on Facebook, this absurd proposal would make the access from Elon Moreh or Itamar to Har Bracha, which is about a 10-15 minute drive, in order to get from one town to the other, according to the maps that have been proposed, the residents of Elon Moreh would have to go east into the Jordan Valley, north to Beit Sha'an, west towards Haifa, south towards Petach Tikva, and then come west back again to Har Bracha. It would take them about 2.5 hours to get from point one to point B, that today takes only 10 minutes to get from one point to the other. And that is our great concern. She says 6 of these towns are in the Samaria, which is under the regional council of the Samaria Regional Council, the Shomron Regional Council, under the direction of Yossi Dagan, who is the mayor of this regional council. And I am a member of the councilman on the council. And he is one of the leaders who is voicing opposition to this plan. These towns are Chermesh, Mavodotan, Elon Moreh, Itamar, Har Bracha, and Itzhar. Those are 6 towns in the Shomron Regional Council that would be, access to these towns would be very challenging if we were to agree to the maps that were attached to the deal of the century by President Trump. The other 5 towns are in the South Hills of Hebron, which are under the regional council of the Hills of Hebron, whose director is Yochai Dimri, and he has also been outspoken in opposition to this plan. Those towns are Telem, Aduran, Negaot, Bet Chagai, and Otniel. 3 more of these towns that would become isolated are in Gush Etzion. They are Maleh Amos, Asfar, and Karmet Sur, and Ateret in the Benjamin region. These, of course, as I listed in an article that I wrote a few months ago, are in addition to many towns that would not be totally isolated within the Palestinian Authority, but they would be accessible through very narrow corridors within the Palestinian Authority, which together add up to about 40 Israeli towns. And that, in a nutshell, is our concern regarding these towns whose future would be threatened by the Trump plan. I'm going to cut off here and hopefully continue this discussion in another session. Feel free to write any of your comments or questions in the comment section. I would love to hear back from you. Be well.